Optics has built a platform for SQL-powered security analytics. Extending the OS query agent, Optics collects, aggregates, and analyzes a wide range of system data and makes that available to solve multiple security challenges. Their solution provides visibility across Linux, macOS, Windows, containers, and cloud workloads. Their customers are using the Optics platform for fleet visibility, intrusion detection, investigation, and audit and compliance. Visit securityweekly.com/Optics and be one of the first to see how they've mapped over 500 behavioral rules to the MITRE ATT&CK framework. You want to get the right things done for your security program. Sounds simple, but what are the right things for you? What does done mean? And how are you going to get there? Rapid7 realizes more than anyone how hard this can be. While Rapid7's Insight platform offers you industry-leading vulnerability management and detection and response solutions, their focus is on understanding where you are so that they can help you get where you're going. Visit securityweekly.com/Rapid7 to get started. Data protection is a top priority with today's work-from-home workforce. However, current data loss prevention tools inadequately protect data in cloud or SaaS offerings from insider threats. Secure Circle automatically protects data as it leaves SaaS services such as GitHub, AWS, and Salesforce. The protection is transparent to users and works with any application to persistently protect data, even source code. Secure your data with Secure Circle's Zero Trust Data Protection. Begin your 30-day free trial by visiting securityweekly.com/Secure Circle. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Join Amit Barakat, co-founder and CEO of Perimeter 81, and myself for a deep dive into the problems inherent in legacy VPN technology. Together, we will explore solutions for the modern workforce and how momentum towards a perimeterless architecture is helping redefine the future of cybersecurity. Register today at securityweekly.com/Perimeter81 because that webcast is in fact tomorrow. This segment is sponsored by Gigamon. To learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Gigamon. Joining us today from Gigamon is Steve Porcello, a senior engineer. Steve started out as a security analyst for organizations in the New York City area and is here today to discuss how network detection can fill the gaps in your security program. Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks. How's it going? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's going well. So, Steve, many of us think of Gigamon in a kind of similar light in that they make network taps, and I know I'm grossly oversimplifying that solution, and I do not mean to do it any disservice. Gigamon, of course, being a solid player if you want to collect network full packet captures from within your network, I'm assuming also in the cloud. But Steve, if you could describe the history of how now Gigamon is playing more in the security space than ever before.
Yeah, sure. So that's really what Gigamon is known for, the packet brokering, aggregation, and then doing some smarts with that traffic before shipping it off to a tool. And yeah, there is cloud capability and visibility there as well. However, about 2.5 years ago now, Gigamon made an acquisition of a company called Iceberg. And so Iceberg was really a true security play in the network security monitoring, which has really kind of turned into the network detection and response category of a security solution. And so, the acquisition there was really to try and get more into the security field. And also, it was a perfect marriage, right? So Gigamon does all of this aggregation of traffic extremely well and ships it off to security tools. And when, I came over with the acquisition at Iceberg, when we would talk to customers about how are they currently getting traffic into their tools or how do they want to get traffic into Iceberg, Gigamon almost always came up. And so I would always make recommendations. And so, when they were looking to acquire a security-based company, it was just a match made in heaven. And so that's kind of where we're at today. We've evolved the products beyond kind of that network security monitoring into more of like a network detection and response where, we're looking at not just metadata, but also payload analysis and then incorporating some of the machine learning capabilities that are, top of mind when it comes to different types of threat detection today.
So, Steve, how do customers today get their detection engines deployed? Because I feel like there was a lot of disjointed efforts, and I know the answer to this, and it makes me excited because it's really geeky and nerdy. But like before, you'd have the tap, and that tap would have to send data maybe to something else that would aggregate it, and then that would have to send it off to something else that would do the security analysis that would report up to a separate console from what the network team was looking at, and there was all these different points where your data kind of traveled through. In this model today, now that Iceberg and Gigamon are combined forces, the detection engines actually run inside the Gigamon hardware. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is. And so, again, after the acquisition, Iceberg got rebranded as Threat Insight. And so today, Threat Insight is actually built into the Gigamon hardware. So there's these modules or cards, if you will. They're called smart cards. And you basically plug them into a Gigamon chassis. And so customers that have already bought Gigamon, HC1s, for example, they've already put time and effort into deploying these. Rather than having to deploy another standalone appliance, they can actually just plug in one of these smart cards into that chassis, and it will act as a threat insight sensor for them. So the deployment has really been simplified. It's been integrated. And like you said, rather than having to go through multiple steps, you're aggregating at one point, and now you're also inspecting the traffic all at one point. And that's been a huge value add for a lot of our customers.
Matt?
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask, right? Because when you think about detecting at that point, if you have multiple appliances in place, then how do you aggregate the detections to look at them more holistically? I get the value of doing detection as close to the point as possible because that speeds some up. Where others may shuffle that data off somewhere and then do the detections, I could see that. But then how do you aggregate across all those individual appliances to centralize all those detections?
Yeah, so Threat Insight is a SaaS-based product. And so, what we try to do is we try to aggregate traffic into a single location as best as possible. But then most of the smarts actually do run up in the cloud. So the sensor itself is basically just extracting the metadata, the payloads that we're looking out of that traffic. And then we're going to be sending that off into our cloud-based backend, which is, we call it the Insight Data Warehouse. And so, ultimately, this is where all the data is stored and normalized, but then all of our really smarts happen up there in terms of detection capabilities. So we have some customers, they're global. They may have several different Gigamon chassis deployed at different data centers across the world. And then, they'll have either standalone sensors or integrated sensors into those chassis. But ultimately, all of that data is going to a single backend where then we can normalize it, timestamp normalization, timestamp standardization, which is notorious for, headaches for a lot of security folks trying to figure out, if this event happened right now, what time is it if it happened, in APAC or what's the time conversion? And so when it comes down to detection and triage, now you have all this event data normalized for you. That's all in a single location in the cloud.
And the detection engines you speak of, Steve, are based on some of it's based on open source technologies, correct?
Correct. So the metadata, it's a Bro or Zeek now, depending on what you want to call it. Some people are still diehard Bro fans. So ultimately, the metadata engine is a Bro or Zeek, and we've kind of customized a lot of the scripts that run in it in order for us to extract the information that we really need. We have a research team, a dedicated research team called ATR, Applied Threat Research. And, they really help dictate what is the data that's going to be most useful for detection. And so the two main engines that run on the sensor is the Bro or Zeek engine. And then there's also a Suricata engine that runs on there as well. And ultimately, when ATR tells our engineering team, we might want to consider adding this sort of information into a Bro script, or we might want to work on this particular Suricata signature. It's all based off of its usefulness from like a security aspect, but we are essentially utilizing open source technologies that we have kind of, taken a few steps further and customizing them for performance, but then also for security reasons as well.
And with the shift to the cloud today, what options do I have to be able to do that network packet capture in various cloud providers? Yeah,
so Gigamon also has capabilities to tap and aggregate in the cloud just like it can in the physical world. So we can deploy what's known as V-Series, basically any cloud we can deploy into, and aggregate all of that to a single location. We can do all of the same smarts that we can in the physical world, so like deduplication. If we're collecting traffic from host A and host B, and we're seeing that same traffic laterally from host A to host B, we may collect that traffic twice depending on where it has been aggregated from. And so being able to deduplicate that traffic does a few different things for us. One, it can cut down on cost. So when we ship it to a tool, we're not going to have to pay for that additional throughput utilization. But then two, it makes our tool a lot more useful and from a performance standpoint. And so ultimately in the cloud, it's the same thing. When we see lots of different, and I'll use AWS as an example, we have several different accounts or different VPCs within multiple accounts. We have various different shared resources between VPCs, and we may accidentally or maybe on purpose collect the same traffic twice, but in the cloud, that can be magnified or multiplied depending on what the workloads look like, right? So what we try to do is deduplicate as much of that traffic, and typically we'll see like a 25% or somewhere in that range reduction of traffic simply because we see that same packet happening multiple times. And so in our cloud deployment for Threat Insight, we'll be able to be more efficient when we are collecting and analyzing our traffic, particularly for extremely large environments in cloud.
That's awesome. Sorry,
Steve,
Matt, Adrian.
Yeah. Steve, so we've talked a lot about Paul's Enchanted Quadrant, network, log, endpoint, threat data, and we're seeing this interesting kind of trend emerge. We've got endpoint detection response, we have threat detection and response, we have network detection response. Then we have our traditional SIEM platforms that also have built a bunch of response capabilities. So when you think about the R in network detection response, what do you do versus what needs to be aggregated and done by a kind of a more holistic R response approach? I'm curious where you make those decisions and balances about what things do you do as Gigamon at the network layer? What things go to a more integrated, maybe kind of SIEM solution with SOAR kind of attached to it? Walk me through those response capabilities.
Yeah, so I'd say the first and foremost thing with response is triage. So you might get a detection, but if you can't effectively triage that detection, then you're kind of stuck and you don't know what type of action you're supposed to take, right? So with Threat Insight, one of the things that we tried to do when we built the solution was from really the ground up. Everybody at Iceberg was a former security analyst. And so we thought about, if I got a detection, what are the things that I need to know and understand, like the who, what, where. I think David Bianco he has a blog post out there. It's a few years old now, but it's really like, what are the questions that you're supposed to ask during triage? And that was kind of where we focused when we built in some of the enrichment information into the product to answer those questions upfront during triage. And I think that's part of response, and that's something that sometimes gets overlooked, is being able to effectively understand, okay, this device triggered our detection, but one, what type of device is it? Where is it located? Who are the users that are logging into the device? What is the host name? Do we have any passive DNS records telling us that information? Do we have any DHCP logs? Have we ever seen detections from this device previously? And what software have we seen from the network communicating from this device? So we try to answer all of those questions with our enrichment during triage. And then the second step to that, like you said, is through some sort of action to be taken. Typically, customers that we see or that we work with will typically integrate with something like you said, a SIEM or an orchestration platform, a SOAR. And ultimately, the reason that we're seeing that integration happening is because there are other solutions like an EDR or maybe a mail solution that is inspecting mail. And we want to do some correlation with another system before we actually take an action. And so that's why, even though there are, some response capabilities that can typically happen within the point solution itself. We're seeing more and more a trend of folks trying to do a unified solution, unified response. So in that orchestration platform, they'll build a playbook, and the playbook will pull in data from their EDR and their NDR and any other solution that they want. And then based off of the information that's been correlated together, then they can take a response, whether it's through a network access control, maybe isolating the host or creating a new firewall rule, or if it reaches out to their EDR solution to take an action on a file or quarantine a host, whatever it may be. There's a little more control, and there's a lot more, again, enrichment and context when you're actually taking that action now.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. I mean, there is value in being able to provide some basic functions from a response action perspective. But again, context across the rest of the environment still matters for most advanced SOC teams anyways, right? I mean, they want to understand and correlate all that data across. That's why I was curious how far Gigamon went versus how, what that integration path looks like for customers.
Yep. And so, yeah, exactly. Most of our customers are at that level where they're trying to do that cross correlation between other systems. And yeah, it's been interesting to see how customers have, since the beginning of Iceberg until now, how they've kind of evolved, and how the market has really evolved, and where we're seeing some of the benefits essentially from doing something like doing a lot of that response in an orchestration platform. And so, we never tell customers that we will replace a SIEM or even an orchestration platform. We don't replace EDR. We're complementary to them, honestly. And it's about visibility when you're going to take a response based on a threat detection.
Paul wouldn't have 4 quadrants if they were all one solution.
And Steve, there is very much a security focus to this. As you said, the Iceberg team are very heavily security focused. What are some of the things that they're contributing to in developing in terms of rules, specifically MITRE ATT&CK framework? Also, one of the big complaints I hear is, I can't collect all the DNS traffic because there's just too much of it. I would turn to your solution to get that, because Gigamon's great at aggregating and collecting traffic, and you've got a great security team that likely understands the importance of having visibility into your DNS traffic.
Yeah, for sure. And so, I mentioned the applied threat research team. Their main focus is on building the detection capabilities within Threat Insight. And so they do put a focus on using the MITRE ATT&CK framework as kind of a starting point, and looking at the different stages of an attack, and how can we, from the network perspective, actually detect C2 communication or discovery or lateral movement or data exfiltration, whatever it may be. They kind of break each tactic down, and then take a look at the techniques and sub-techniques, and really try to determine, is there a way that we can detect this from the network, or is there not? Because MITRE ATT&CK is great, but there is a heavy focus on really techniques from the endpoint, where you need the visibility on the endpoint. And so where we can, from a network perspective, that's where we employ a lot of our detection and our detection engineering from ATR. But from the visibility, like you said, with DNS logs, I remember when I was an analyst, one of the things I wanted to do was collect all of our DNS logs into our SIEM. And I remember somebody looking at me and saying, yeah, that's not going to be possible, because you're basically going to exceed the license on our SIEM. And so, something like an NDR solution is designed for that, right? Its backend is purpose built to be collecting every DNS request that's happened, whether it's a DNS request to your internal Active Directory server, or whether it's a DNS request out to Google's Quad 8, or if it's a DNS request going up to Russia, some server that's being hosted up in Russia, or some country outside of the United States, and something that we weren't expecting, essentially. Having that visibility and knowing about that is really key. And then having the visibility allows you to be able to effectively build better detection capabilities.
Yeah, I never liked it when solutions were like, well, you can't collect that because it'll cost too much, or it exceeds our license. It's like, well, shouldn't we collect everything and then worry about it later? Because if I don't collect everything, I'm going to miss stuff, and I might miss an attack or miss the opportunity to do incident response and forensics.
Yep.
Adrian?
Yeah. So question for you here, especially talking about, mapping back some of these threats, looking at some of these, marrying the threat intel with the DNS request you're seeing. How, and I've asked this throughout the years, and answers I get kind of change over time, but how important is TLS inspection? As we see TLS advancing to like 1.3, and part of that metadata, is getting chipped away and encrypted. Because traditionally it's a lot of work to both implement and maintain TLS SSL inspection. So I was curious as to your opinion, how essential, how important that is today.
No, I mean, it's the exact same thing that we hear from customers. I'd say most of the customers I deal with, it's about 50-50, right? Some of them want to take that undertaking and deal with the headache of like certificate management and do some sort of SSL inspection or decryption because, either they have the time, the resources to be able to do it, but there are a lot of customers that can't do it either financially or don't have the resources, the personnel to do it, or even the expertise to do it. And so I would say there's plenty of both out there that I've talked to from like a customer perspective. With Threat Insight, again, back in the Iceberg days when we first kind of developed it, and even today into some of the capabilities of Threat Insight, we try to be able to provide some sort of detection capability regardless of which path you've taken as a customer. And so if you are doing your SSL inspection decryption, that's when you'll be able to see the HTTP metadata, right? You can see what the URI is, you can see what the method was, the response code, all of those metadata fields that you would typically grab from HTTP. But if you're not doing any sort of decryption, then you need to be able to look at the metadata of that traffic. So, what was the encryption version? Is it SSL v2, v3, TLS 1.2, 1.3? Can you look at the cipher suite being used? Can you look at the certificate information being used to encrypt that traffic? And so, there's a lot that can be grabbed from even just the metadata on the encrypted traffic, and even something like JA3 hashing or JA3S. We end up looking at some of those more for context than for detection. However, the more information that you can gather and that you can get from the encrypted traffic metadata, the better you're going to be off, right? And it's just like we were saying, the more visibility, the more data you have, the more you can play with from like a detection engineering standpoint. So I have plenty of customers that, they're doing detection based off of maybe like a frequency. So for example, some of our machine learning capabilities will look at TLS 1.3 outbound with a frequency of like every 2 minutes, and it's going to a new domain that we've never seen before, and it's hosted in like a low reputation VPS or something along those lines. And that's kind of the machine learning framework that we've built around within Threat Insight, is to look at the metadata that's available to us in encrypted traffic, and how can we essentially leverage that for threat detection, even if we can't see the contents of the traffic.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks for that.
So, Steve, is there the opportunity to collect both like Netflow information in addition to full packet, and can users kind of tune that on the platform?
So the sensors are really designed to just ingest raw network traffic. We will generate flow data. So we'll generate like what was the duration of the flow or how much data was transmitted in the flow. But we won't ingest like net flow data directly, simply because there's really not enough information in just basic net flow data. We're not able to see the protocol, different headers and metadata fields that we really need for the analysis. So we need to see essentially the full traffic. We don't necessarily always need the payloads. It depends on if we want to leverage payload inspection using Suricata. But if we can get the headers, then obviously the Brower Zeek will be able to extract that. But there's a lot of customers that they'll be able to look at all of that information that they would normally get from 3 different systems, like a Netflow system, a metadata system, and then a payload analysis or an IDS solution. It's kind of all rolled up into one sensor, and then it's giving you all that visibility on top of it. So while there's not as much customization in terms of being able to ingest Netflow data, it's almost not useful for us anyway. We want to see the full traffic, and we want to be able to extract all the information out of that traffic that we need.
Awesome. Adrian, final
questions? As an analyst, though, can I go back and look at that full packet capture data? Do you capture it just for when you alert on something, or is there an option to have everything all the time, full packet?
So it doesn't do full packet capturing. The majority of questions that most analysts will ask can be answered using metadata. So I want to see what traffic was between host A and host B, 20 days ago, for example. You can typically answer most of your questions using just the metadata. When you can't answer those questions using the metadata, we have a targeted packet capture capabilities. So you can deploy essentially a Berkeley packet filter that will be invoked, and it's basically like a TCP dump on the sensor. It'll capture specifically what it is that you want to look at and throw into a PCAP file, and then you'll be able to look at that. It's reactionary, and so this is something that you would have to set before you're able to actually get the PCAP files. That being said, we actually are working on a integration with some other vendors out there that do full packet capturing. Our value prop isn't really in the full packet capturing, but through an integration, we can show you all the metadata and then pivot into that other solution that's doing the full packet capturing. And now you've kind of got the best of both worlds, the metadata analysis and the event inspection, as well as the full packet if you want to pivot into that. So again, more on the metadata side and analysis, and then the packet capture capabilities are very targeted on specific things that we would want to look for. Honestly, most customers use it in terms of incident response. So if you see a detection fire, you want to automatically start capturing some of the PCAP files for that traffic. You can start capturing it, and then if there's a file being exfiltrated, for example, you'll be able to carve that file out of the traffic that you've captured.
Okay, yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, and in my experience, I've had SIMs that would just capture Netflow, and it was never enough. You always need those headers, so I totally agree there. But I can't recall how many situations I would have needed the payload, but certainly the headers. As for you mentioned BPF, do you have to create those filters yourself, or is that something kind of automatically handled by the platform?
So you can. We have basically like a help guide on BPF if people aren't familiar with how to create a BPF, and we've got several examples on different BPF filters. But it's meant to be flexible, so you can customize and create your own BPF. Our platform is really designed around a different kind of querying language. Honestly, it looks a lot like Elastic querying. And so all of our event searching is through this query language called IQL, or Insight Query Language. However, with our packet capturing, it does use Berkeley packet filters, and we'll show you in some of our training and some of our help documentation what that mapping would look like. So if you wanted to, again, capture traffic from host A to host B, what that Berkeley packet filter might look like when we go through training. And there's even plenty of help documentation within the product that kind of shows customers how to do that if they're not familiar with it already.
Great.
Sweet. Okay. Steve, thank you so much for appearing on Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thank you guys for having me.
And for folks who want to learn more, please visit securityweekly.com/Gigamon. Stay tuned. Ganesh Pai and Julian Waite from Upticks coming up next.